Hello. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We are live on Facebook, and of course, we are recording for posterity this conversation with Kathleen Deignan and Libby Osgood. My name is Jon M. Sweeney. I'm the contributing editor in books here at spiritualityandpractice.com. And we have an occasional series of conversations with interesting authors, which we call Off the Page. So we're taking this off the page conversation to Prince Edward Island, where Libby Osgood comes to us from, and to New Rochelle, New York, where Kathleen Deignan comes to us from. So I want to introduce you to who they are. I'll just do this very briefly. They are the authors together, editors and authors together of the book Teilhard de Chardin, A Book of Hours. And we're going to get into what this book is all about. But let me tell you who they are, for those of you who don't know. Kathleen Deignan is a sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame, is a teaching theologian and founding director of the Deignan Institute for Earth and Spirit at Iona College, New York. She's a founding convener of the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue and a Green Faith Fellow engaged in interfaith environmental leadership. She's president emerita of the International Thomas Merton Society, and her books include Thomas Merton, A Book of Hours. Kathleen sits on the board of the American Teilhard Association. Libby Osgood also has many letters after her name and various degrees, as does Kathleen. She is an aerospace engineer who teaches sustainable design engineering at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. Her research is on the intersection of science and faith, engineering, education, and design pedagogy. She is a religious sister with the Congregation of Notre Dame in Montreal. So, Kathleen and Libby, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jon.
We're pleased to be here.
So what I want to do is I want to get the two of you talking with each other so that people can get a sense of how you worked together, because I know that you worked together very carefully and closely on this book, creating this book. Mm-hmm. And I also want to ask you some questions that I think might be interesting to those who are watching and listening. I have only about a half a dozen questions I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to be looking to the chat. So those of you who are watching, I want you to type a question in the chat, and I will eventually somehow see that, and I will pose your questions when we get to the bottom of the hour. And we'll probably wrap up at 1:45. So I hope that works for everyone. I wanted to get us started with, I know you're both, particularly Kathleen is the philosophical thinker, and I know Libby is more the scientist. But in fact, let me just share that I thought it was wonderful to be able to work with Libby because I've never worked with a rocket scientist before. So, I mean, everyone says, well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but sometimes you do. But anyway, the big question I want to start with, and I want you both to reflect on this, if you will, is what is it that we are doing when we pray? Because you've created a book for prayer. A lot of us don't do intercessory prayer a whole lot anymore. A lot of us don't do what we would think of as transactional prayer anymore. And so a lot of people don't know how to pray anymore. They don't know what it means. They don't know why they would. And they really don't know, what am I actually doing when I pray? So what are we doing when we pray?
Well, Libby, may I begin with that?
Please.
I love the way you have cleared a path to a conversation on prayer, Jon, about in so many ways what it is not for us anymore. But what it is, at least for me, is an intentional presencing to a presence, and to find a way, a practice, a pathway that allows me to, in a sense, lighten all of the the thickness of my everyday existence and world, the cares, the concerns, all of that, and find a way into my own nature, which is capable and discernible, felt sense of a thinner sense of myself. And in that place, in that, what Thomas Merton would call, that virginal point of self, to just allow myself to settle there. I am a person who practices the prayer of the cloud of unknowing. So much of what happens for me in prayer is simply showing up and tuning in to that sense of myself that is bigger than myself and is presencing to a presence.
Well, yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And Jon, I mean, way to pick an easy question to start us off. I love it. You go straight for it. Well, when I think of prayer, I think too that there is a very groundedness to it that grounds us to the core of ourselves, to the earth, and to the great power, the great divinity that runs through all of that, right? Through me, through the earth, through what is that pulse of the universe. Can I tap into that? Can I start to sing with the same resonance and feel that frequency, but I think too, what's so wonderful about prayer is the great variety of prayer, that sometimes prayer for me really is being in a forest, walking a path, and just really feeling being surrounded by nature, being surrounded in the natural world. But then I also really resonate too often with the Jesus prayer, when it's something more meditative that you can just repeat over and over and over. And it becomes the drumbeat, of your day. But then at times too, allowing prayer to be the very intentional practice to open yourself up to what's happening in the world. What are the needs of the world? What do I need to be aware of that's happening in the world? And who is really hurting? Who do we need to care for virtually, and invite the divine presence into that and into us, and how that affects us? That it's so relational, even in the quiet of yourself. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm not going to let it go yet because I love hearing you talk about this. So where does prayer take place?
Well, I'll jump. Everywhere. Like for me, my spiritual director is so wonderfully lenient, because so often for people, prayer is 1 hour in the morning, do her, get her done, do it hard, right? But I find it truly is the drumbeat. So I'm in my office at the university right now, and I know before I step into the classroom, especially on a difficult day, it's a quick pause before going in, inviting the Holy Spirit to accompany me in what I'm doing and turn it into a ministry, even in an engineering lecture. Or it's seconds before the difficult conversation when I see the student at the door that isn't doing so hot, that we need to convey that. So prayer occurs in so many different places, in addition to the chapel, that I have to say, being here in my office, prayer happens a lot here.
Thank you, Jon. I guess for me, I don't think about where prayer happens. I think about me being a prayer. or a prayer. I'm thinking more about this ongoing life process of conversion, where you have become a contemplative and so that means that as I move in and through my life and through my day, it's all in the presence of what my little koan is living in the presence of the presence. And so I am this contemplative prayer. I am the prayer itself. So, I'm always rooting for Julie of Norwich, who thinks going to the bathroom is a miracle. And how shall I, as Eliot would say, prepare the face to meet the other faces that I meet in this world? I love that Libby reminds us that prayer is about this global embrace in this very, very, very existential, historical, socio-political, ecological embrace of this world, this planet. I embrace it as the contemplative person that I am, this person laboring to live in the divine milieu, since we're talking about Teilhard. So it doesn't happen, it happens, yes, what Libby says is true, it happens everywhere, because I am the prayer, so to speak. So I'd hyphenate the word prayer to be a verb, really, or is it a noun?
Well, and Kathleen, I love that you identify that, because it transforms it too into not just the every moment and every minute, but the incarnational act of constantly, very intentionally being connected, and an awareness of the divine presence in everything we do, regardless of whether or not we acknowledge it. But if we can acknowledge it and make that more intentional, then it becomes so much more meaningful and infused, that it's weightier, it's heavier, it's more real.
Mm. And I think that prayer isn't piety, and I think that so much of our teaching has somehow wanted to turn us into pious folk. Well, prayer is so authentic and so real and so raw at times. I love the Jewish tradition. I love how in our the tradition of our relations and our earlier siblings, that we have been taught how to wrestle with God, how to lament, how to curse, how to swear. I mean, I'm Irish, and so there is a whole tradition among the Irish monastics of curses. Of course, they're not cursing God, they're cursing other monks. But in any
Cursing down the mountain, right? Cursing into the valley.
Exactly. Authentic, that nothing of our nature is outside of this contemplative transformation that's trying to happen in us, so that we can always be bigger and essentially, and most importantly, always more compassionate.
Well, we are about to be talking specifically about Teilhard de Chardin, A Book of Hours. We are with Kathleen Deignan and Libby Osgood, and you are here with us on Facebook Live. So thank you for being here. So now let's turn to the book. And what I want to ask you is broadly, perhaps, Kathleen, could you explain to people what is a book of hours? I don't think that's generally understood. And then maybe Libby, you could explain to us, how did the two of you put this book together.
So thank you. A book of hours is actually a kind of literary formula that has been, at least in the Christian tradition, for centuries and centuries. It was, I suppose, first most developed and promulgated in the Middle Ages, where people who were not monastics had the, how should we say, a contemplative or a prayer tool, or a prayer, sounds funny, but I am with my sister Libby, technology to aid them in the daily and in the hourly prayer of returning to this kind of deep consciousness, consecrating the time, wanting to stay in the flow of a day that was dedicated to the divinity. Because, you know, if we had been monastics, we'd be always being called off into the monastic chapel for the horarium of the day. You'd be praying the Psalms morning, noon, and night, middle of the night, middle of the dawn in the morning. But for lay folk, these book of hours were very, very helpful tools to stay in this pattern and this flow. So for me, I wanted a literary genre that kept us kind of resonant with our tradition, but taking that formula and doing something new with it. And so that's what I initially did with Thomas Merton, creating a book of hours for him. And that's what I really wanted to do for Teilhard, because I felt that his legacy, dense and difficult as it may be, was also radiant with these cosmopoetics that we couldn't really kind of take in little by little and, as they say, metabolize, unless it were put into a different kind of formula. So that's why a book of hours.
Yes, and so the process that we used, following the original formula that Kathleen had used for her book of Merton, we first read through all of Teilhard's essays and his letters that we could find. So that is somewhere around 5,600 pages. And what's interesting is we did all of this on Zoom. So it was, you know, pretty well during the pandemic. So we went through the pages on Zoom with each other, reading it, and anything that really truly struck us, we set aside and said, we'll save this for later. And truly the ones that make you stand in awe, the wows, but also the, ooh, Teilhard, that hurts, ow. And so we set all of those aside in one large document of hundreds of beautiful, beautiful quotes, and then started to go through and look at what is the structure of the book? How should this be arranged from Sunday for each of the days? And though a traditional book of hours is a 7-day format, which would be a hexameron, we realized that Teilhard is so revolutionary that we needed an 8th day. He is so focused on tomorrow, on the future, that we couldn't do Sunday to Saturday. So, but we also needed tomorrow. So we have an 8th day for tomorrow. So after we went through each of the quotes that we found just profound, Kathleen calls these the found prayers, that we started to look at what type of prayer is that. And this is where the collaboration between us was very helpful, because Kathleen as a theologian and me as an engineer, I don't have a background of theology. I don't know the types of prayers and invocation and doxology and what each of those means, other than what I'm used to reciting in church, but not knowing what each one is called. So along the way, we then identified, oh, this would be a beautiful doxology for the day on creation or for the day on human consciousness, following Teilhard's different themes through the days. So then we reorganized it and our structure emerged, but it was very systematic, which made me feel comfortable. And truly we had to, because it was on Zoom. So how do you convey that information back and forth and organize it?
Wonderful. Now we need a little bit of a tutoring on who was Teilhard de Chardin. And we shouldn't go into this too deep, I suppose, but you have to get a little deep because he was deep quickly. And as the two of you answer that question, who was he? I want you to also answer the question, he was a scientist, and that's part of what you're going to tell us. So a paleontologist, a physicist, I want you to answer the question, what do these fields have to do with informing how we pray?
Kathleen, do you want to take your take on Teilhard?
Well, I don't know if we're going to get a chance to say how much I loved working with my sister Libby, as fresh eyes, fresh mind, fresh insight into Teilhard as a young scholar. For me, well, who is Teilhard? Teilhard is this, it's a phenomenon of Teilhard because he is such a unique character, personality, entity, really, within the religious world of thought. He is born at the end of the 19th century, I think. Libby, correct me on my dates. And he then he emerges at the beginning of the 20th century, which was such a creative time scientifically, which is Libby's wheelhouse. It's the time when as you say, he's a paleontologist. Anthropologists are combing the planet for vestiges of human beginnings. And Teilhard's fascinated with human beginnings. He decides, as a young man, being born in the Auvergne, he is, even as a child, he is a child inquisitor of the natural world and has his own little, as he calls them, idols of iron. So even as a child, he's form breaking what the theological constructs of his world are. He goes into the Jesuits. He is encouraged to pursue his scientific studies. But as he pursues his scientific studies, he's simultaneously pursuing theological studies. So this is an interfacing for him. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because what Teilhard encounters, as we all do, I think, in this particular moment of human knowledge, is the how should we say, the dissonance sometimes between our religious thought and religious vocabularies and scientific paradigms. This was Teilhard's dilemma. And as he inherits and really embraces passionately the paradigm of evolution, he is radically concerned with the constriction of Catholic theological thought that is not only not embracing, but is marginalizing and restricting access to these new paradigms. Teilhard's passion in his life, his burden, the thing he wrestled with most as a Catholic and as a priest, as a Jesuit, whom he really felt a mission and a ministry to bridge the new science of his moment with theology and spirituality was the question, who will give evolution its God? So I turn it over to my sister now, who is the scientist and understands so much of what his dilemma was, and far away, and I think in a lot of ways remains our dilemma.
Yes, well, and what I find fascinating about Teilhard was that, you know, he was living in a time, he was a stretcher bearer in World War I. You know, he knew suffering. He knew he was exiled because his writings were surprising and scary to the higher ups, that rather than have him being in a teaching position, they sent him off to China to do his science and not be too influential. So he was even, you know, not allowed to publish his works during his lifetime. And it was his friends, he left them to his secretary, who published them after his death. And I find many things fascinating about Teilhard, one of which being his adherence to his vow of obedience for 70 years. You know, like he really, really listened. And even though his great desire was to share this knowledge, share this spirituality, share this confluence of faith and science, and but not being allowed to, except for with his immediate friends, that I as a young religious, still in temporary formation, that does confound me. And I'm so impressed by it, because he had what was clearly a calling, you know, a desire, a drive, a ministry, and found ways to continue to pursue that and feed that. While he was, some of the things that I'm interested with his life, he was teaching as a young Jesuit in Egypt. And while he was teaching on his weekends, he would just comb the desert, walking and walking and walking, and found so many species and fossils that he sent back to Paris for archiving, that they actually named one after him. And the Teilhardian, it's very cool, or Teilhardia. And so I am tickled by how frequently he lets his science flag fly, so to say, you know, and embraces that side, while seeking the spirituality and that close connectedness to the earth. For example, his Mass of the Earth, or I'm probably saying that wrong.
World.
Mass on the World, thank you. In which he, you know, living where he did in China, he wouldn't have had access to the chalice and the everything every day. So he often, while he was on these expeditions, these geological expeditions looking for human remains, early humanoids, he offered a mass with what he had available, which is a beautiful way to practice in a place where he had limitations. And ultimately, he was on an expedition that found an early version Sinanthropus, or they call him Peking Man, an early humanoid. So here is this person who is being far too embracing of new ideas like evolution, because he's living in a time of quantum being discovered, Einstein, even Lemaitre and the Big Bang being proposed. Like, he is living in the time when all of this is happening in such an exciting way. Bergson was a big influence on him, and he was a philosopher of the time. And so he's living in this really exciting period, tries to engage in the slightest way, and is exiled to China. At which point he finds evidence or a step in the process, and is part of this discovering evolution, in a sense of human evolution, which is so gratifying for me, for him. I know I didn't answer your question, Jon, about connecting it to the prayers, but I do feel like it was infused in his everyday. It was his ministry, it was his mission, and everything he did.
Well, I'm going to take you to the connecting to the prayers now, if I may. I'm Jon Sweeney. I'm at spiritualityandpractice.com, talking with Kathleen Deignan and Libby Osgood about Teilhard de Chardin, A Book of Hours. We're going to get to your questions in just a minute. Actually, I'm going to get to one of them right now to get us inside the book. I'm assuming Kathleen and Libby, you have the book somewhere so you can refer to what I'm about to ask you, because I don't want to put you on the spot too much. But we have a question from Tom who says, I love the book. And he says, how did you come about the writing of the Lord's Prayer in the book? It is absolutely right on. So take us into the book, explain that, maybe read it to us.
Well, so I have to say, like, that Tom, you identified one of the most exciting days for Kathleen and I opened up right to it, actually. As we were going through looking for these found prayers, there was one that, it came up and I said, Kathleen, look at this. And she looked and she's like, yep, that's it. That's the Lord's Prayer. This is Teilhard. We didn't change anything. And that's true of like so much of the book, of all of the book, really. We were so intentionally adherent to his language, his text, his words. We did line breaks and changed very, very, very few things because what he has is beautiful. What he has is right on. So we really truly discovered and found the prayers within his texts and put them in one place and reorganized them. But this is Teilhard.
And so, as Libby says, that was our practice and our process. And we would come to his work every single day with such enthusiasm and reverence, I think, real respect. We wanted to let his voice resonate. And for the Lord's Prayer, trying to imagine what would a cosmic Lord's Prayer sound like, because what we were serving, what we were trying to do was to answer his question, who will give evolution its God? And how will we pray toward that God of evolution? And so these words of Teilhard seem to be the way that opened up that possibility for us.
Libby, could you read it? Could you read it?
I
Libby?
sure can. And I just want to acknowledge it's in Heart of the Matter, page 56 and page 58. The two parts come together in that one essay in Heart of Matter. He said, and for those who are following along in the book, we include the Lord's Prayer in every dawn and every dusk hour. So this is the one prayer that is repeated 16 times throughout the book. He said, Lord of my childhood and Lord of my last days, God, complete in yourself, yet for us continually being born. God, you offer yourself to our worship as evolver and evolving, the only being that can satisfy us. Sweep away at last the clouds that still hide you, the clouds of hostile prejudice and of false creeds. You have become for my mind and heart much more than God who was and who is. You have become God who shall be.
Thank you. It's marvelous.
Beautiful.
And you anticipated John's question that had already been in the chat, which is what page is the Lord's Prayer on? So you'll find it throughout the book.
Sorry. And I do just want to add that we want people to be able to discover him. So when you find a prayer and you're like, wow, what is that from? We're very careful about noting everything in the back so that any devotee of Teilhard can go find and read that original essay to see how is it in context.
Kathleen, did you want to say something?
I have left my book on the kitchen table.
Oh, no, that's fine. I thought you were jumping in.
I'm going to count on Libby. And by the way, Libby has a much more immediate sense of where everything is in the book and how we really try to offer it to the contemplatives who will be holding this book for prayer, to be able to go and become more friendly with Teilhard, should they wish. And I just do want to say this. People say to me, oh, I can't wait to read your book. Please don't read this book. This is not a book to be read. All of the books in the bibliography
on the kitchen
are to be
table.
read. But here, This book is simply to be prayed. I break it open several times a day, and I'm arrested. I can't even finish an hour, to be honest. It's too rich. This gorgeous Frenchman, it's like he has served up to us the most wonderful gâteau or whatever. It's too rich, and it's to be savored moment by moment.
Now, that spiritual richness, I have to ask this question because it is true for me, and I'm guessing it is true for a lot of people who are watching us now and who will watch this later, which is that I love the language of the Psalms so much, and I know that language so well. It's in my heart. You know, when I was asking you earlier, where does prayer happen? I was actually thinking, in what part of your body does it happen? But anyway, the Psalms, the psalmist says, you know, may my prayer rise like incense to you. Now, that's still my worldview. That's the psalmist has ingrained it into me. Is that no good now? Does that not work anymore?
Oh, it totally works, John. It totally works. If I had to, and I have had to, name myself in this world, I would name myself a psalmist. I think that is who we are, especially in this Judaic Christian lineage, heritage.
But it's bad science, right?
No, it's not. No, not at all. I mean, I hope that as people pray with this psalm, book of Psalms of Teilhard, they'll understand that it's not. And by the way, I mean, we have so many modalities of praise that are part of our inheritance, and nothing gets left aside, and nothing gets marginalized or discarded. So we were hoping that we could set Teilhard in the lineage of the psalmists, as in a sense, I'm working on a new book of ours of Thomas Berry, that we can set him in the lineage of the prophets as we pray with the prophets. So yeah, oh no, the Psalms forever.
Well, and may I add, like the sense of rising up, while we may not, we may no longer consider God on a cloud right above us in that up sense. You do tap into something that Teilhard does talk about, which is this axial notion of rising, that God is both pushing from behind, compelling us to evolve and continue forward, but God is also pulling from the future, pulling us towards in Omega, right? Is pulling in an axial, a straight up kind of way, to help us to continue to evolve as we go through, and become more and more and more. So I think the psalmists encourage us to do that too. That is a very evolutive. I think Teilhard would approve with your sense.
Thank you, Libby. I appreciate that very much.
That's great, Libby. Thank you.
Teilhard de Chardin, a book of ours. We have a couple of questions from others that I want to get to pose to Kathleen Deignan and Libby Osgood, our guests. One of them is a comment from Maureen, which is something I was going to comment on as well. Kathleen, when I have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I do thank God that all is functioning as it should. We must be thankful for so many little things. So these are prayers for me too. That's what Maureen says. I was going to come back to that and say how Jewish Julian of Norwich sounds when she says that, because it's one of the essential morning blessings in Judaism too. The prayer goes something like, blessing for all of the openings that should be open are open, and all of the closings that should be closed are closed.
Mm-hmm. So wonderful. It's so wonderful. It is, as Libby says, so incarnate. And I think Teilhard wants us to live in the fullness of that incarnational identity, more than identity, as the Buddhists would say, this construction that we are. And yes, I mean, now, Maureen, you're making me think I should leave a copy of Teilhard's Book in my bathroom. So that when we go into the kitchen in the daytime, as we're heading out the door towards some work that is given to us to do, in the middle of the night, when I wake up and maybe just find myself in the middle of a dream and I can't get back to sleep, crack the book. Let us enter into another hour.
And one thing we haven't talked about, Jon, if you don't mind, one of my favorite parts of the book is that I have many, obviously, but is the construction of the days. That Sunday is not just Sunday. Sunday is, because Teilhard is so evolutive, or Sunday is the beginning. Sunday is the Big Bang. Sunday is a universal understanding of God. And each day has its own theme as it moves forward to help to help all of us understand the things that Teilhard believed deeply in, and it moves through evolution. So one of his biggest themes was the consciousness, for us to know that we know. He says, admittedly, the animals know, but they don't know that they know, whereas the humans know that we know. So Wednesday is devoted to humanity evolving and consciousness. But then Teilhard says that's not enough. So Thursday is building the world. What do we do with that awareness? What do we do with that knowledge? So it's all prayers devoted to that. So I've started to recommend, as people read it, worry less about what day it is, I'd say, and worry more about what are you trying to pursue? Are you in a very hard moment? Friday, he has some beautiful writings on creative suffering and what can we do with that suffering for the ultimate good. Whereas Saturday is like a spiritualizing kind of day, and Monday is a very Christic day, that we can get to know Teilhard through each of the days differently.
And we were inspired to do that. This is not our own construction. We were inspired to do that because that is what all of these, quote, breviaries of the various traditions have. That was the way they imprinted the days or understood the days. Saturday is a Marian day. Saturday is a day for the feminine to really break forth and be entered into. As Libby said earlier on, in the beginning, when we were doing theology, at least in the Christian form, early on in the tradition, and we're trying to do this deep reflection out of the biblical worldview, and also trying to bring a theological reflection on biblical worldview about creation. The theologians of those eras created the hexameron, the meditation on the 6 days of creation. And that always fascinated me. And I wondered and I wished that I had the theological creativity to do my own hexameron, or a septameron, 7 days of creation. Now we've moved into an 8-day creation scheme. But Teilhard, in a sense, gave us the opportunity to do that together in a way that would allow for a radically contemporary meditation on the days of creation from an evolutive scientific paradigm. So we brought poetics and science together, which always makes me smile.
As it should.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more comment. It's not as much a question as a comment, but it's going to give you a lot to reflect on, and you can you can decide how you want to close our time here together. We're talking with Kathleen Deignan and Libby Osgood about Teilhard de Chardin, a book of hours published by Orbis Books just a couple months ago. Jon says this, both Teilhard and Merton saw and experienced a much deeper vein of spirit than was allowed by the Catholic doctrine. They were aware of and active within the larger, more inclusive body. Jon spells body with a capital B. This is a great gift that people who focus on control try to deny people. Merton and Teilhard are so courageous and tapped into a greater vision that informed, empowered, and inspired them. Thank you for lifting this up.
Thank you for thanking us for lifting it up.
I just love that this book exists, because the act of creating it was more gift for me than anything. Like the fact that there's a book at the end of a process that Kathleen and I got to go through is wonderful. I'm glad others can enjoy it, but the act of creation was so wonderful for me as a young sister entering into this world. And we have, through the publication process and getting to talk to people, encountered so many others who love Teilhard, that I am so grateful for this new community that I now understand, and I'm starting to get to know more. And I think that comment taps into it so beautifully, that, you know, we are finding each other, or I am finding all of you who are already together.
And I've always said, you know, that really what Merton did in his life through his writings and through his work was to gather together a virtual Mertonian monastery. We're all these anonymous, monastics in some sense in the world, or some mode. I like to use the language of the contemplative, that we are really contemplatives of so many different stripes in the world. Our contribution is literally, it is simply one offering that is gorgeous. And I love that it will live certainly beyond me, beyond us. It will live to be discovered by others who may be not just inspired, but I want to say some sort of transmission will happen through the poetics of this book, in the language of this French paleontologist, Jesuit mystic. It's just been such an incredible and humbling gift and blessing to be able to compose it. And I just really want to, in my name and Libby's, thank you, Jon. Thank you for being such a wonderful editor for us through Orbis. You were, if I can say, you were a midwife, you were a handmaid, because we're not gender fussy. You know, we can say that you were that for us, as you facilitated and encouraged us. It was a work of love. As Libby likes to say, it was our passion project. So I'm happy that everybody is receiving it that way.
Passion project comes through very clearly in Teilhard de Chardin, a book of hours. So you should, if you don't know this book already, I hope you will get to know it. I hope you will help it to ground you and help you make your life into a prayer. As Kathleen said, don't just sit and read it. Please don't just sit and read this book.
Nope.
So that sounds like an Abby Hoffman ad for this book. Just don't read this book.
Read this book.
Steal this book and turn your life into a prayer. But anyway, thank you very much for all of you who are with us today, and Kathleen and Libby, and you know, made this book do everything that you hoped it would do in the world.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who came to be part of this celebration. Thank you, Libby.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Jon.